Crossroads with Neethan Shan. In this episode of Crossroads, we're talking to young Tamil Canadians who are pioneering in certain fields and making their trend be noticed in fields like photography. Now we're going to meet somebody who is making her marks in literature, Sharuthie Ramesh. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So Sharuthie, you're a very, very, very young novelist. You started writing a novel when you were 12 and you were published shortly after that. And I have this here with me. This is her publication, first publication. So before we talk about details of the publication, let's talk about how did you get interested in literature? Like how did this come up?
Yeah, so when I was really young, my mom used to always take me to the public library. And so from a really young age, when I was about 5, I was already reading like things that like people in grade 1 or 2 would be reading. And I found in grade 1, I started reading chapter books. And so my love for reading it just encouraged me to write more because I always dreamed of publishing my own book one day because I always had the ambition to write and I have an even more ambition to read.
Okay. So what kind of stuff do you read?
I like to go into the more fiction areas. When I was younger, I used to love learning everything about the world, so I mainly stayed onto nonfiction. But then I found when I entered middle school, I was drawn to the supernatural. So I decided to read fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, and romance books because all teens read romance. And so even now, I continue to read just young adult romance books, but I find that I'm more drawn to the fantasy books.
Okay. So let's talk about reading as a habit. You know, it's a pretty big challenge for parents nowadays to get their children to read. Were your parents encouraging you naturally, or how do you read before you go to sleep, for half an hour, 1 hour, or when do you read it? How did you get into that habit of reading?
Really, it's because my mom used to encourage me. She always said, "Oh, let's go to the library. We'll get you 4 books." And so and she would ask me to recite the books right after I read them. So that became a habit of just reading the book thoroughly. And so I would recite to her everything that happened. And I found that, I was always intrigued by the story plots. And so I find that even now, I find that I read whenever I have spare time. So even sometimes when I'm finished my homework in class, I'll just pull out a book, and then my teacher wouldn't mind it because she knows I'm a bookworm. So I read mainly on free time.
So reciting, when you're telling the story back, did that create the storytelling character? The skill to tell stories before you started writing them down, was that helpful to when you're telling the story back, you're basically narrating it?
Yeah, it's for me, I can summarize it.
Right,
Yeah, it's I can retell the person, but instead I can tell them in my own voice. So when someone reads a book, they'll obviously have a different idea of the character's voice. So when they hear me reciting it with different emotion, it kind of helps me get an idea of what storytelling is like because I know how much emotion to put into one scene. I've read how much emotion is in another.
So let's talk a bit about the writing that you undertaken, right? So is this your the first published work, right?
Yeah,
but did you do work before that were unpublished that you started when you were much younger?
When I was younger, I remember I used to take journal pages and I would rip them out of the journals and I'd staple them together and make little mini books. And I mainly wrote horror stories because I was, again, drawn to the supernatural and I love scaring people. That's kind of what I love to do. So obviously I wrote about horror stories and about little childhood myths like Bloody Mary. I loved writing about her because it always scared everyone. And so basically I remember I actually stapled a whole bunch of stories about Bloody Mary together and I gave it to my school librarian. And so he still has it in catalog, I believe, to this day. And that was back in grade 3.
So let's talk about this book. It got published. I even hear that this got translated in Tamil in India as well. So congratulations.
Thank you.
At such a young age, having something published, having something not just published because now people have resources to publish things, but to be accepted, to be translated, to be carried through major retailers online as well. So before we talk about how you feel about that, let's talk about what's in the book. Can you take us through like a brief introduction? You don't want to tell the entire thing.
Yeah.
You want people to buy it and read it. But what can they expect in the book?
Basically, a choice book one. Well, it's the first book to a trilogy I'm writing, the Chosen Hybrid series, and it basically follows the story of a young girl who on our planet would be considered 18, but because I want to add the fantasy fiction twist to it, she's 118. So we can draw parallels to her life and like a normal young adult's life, because usually, traditionally, when a girl turns 18, she's officially a woman. She has to make choices for her own. She can't depend on her parents for everything. She has to actually become independent. And so a choice kind of follows that line of thought, where girls, they finally need to like make their own choices. And so in my book, for Kyra, it's more like she has to make the choice on whether she's going to choose for her own happiness or for the happiness of others, where she's going to get married to someone she loves or married to someone she doesn't. Yeah.
So it takes through a main character, the struggles of that person.
Yeah, it's character development.
Character development through the thing. So when you got this fame of being recognized and so on, how has it made you feel? Driven to do more, or like is there peer pressure on wanting to be like how do you handle the pressure and stress associated with it too, because you're still a young teenager, right? And friends around you probably haven't seen somebody at their age who's published something, right?
Yeah.
So how does that lifestyle fit in?
Well, basically, I started writing the book over the summer in grade 8, but then I kind of felt a little like down. I was just like, oh, well, I'm too young to publish. And then in the middle of grade 8, I did more research because I was like, the story is gonna keep bugging me. And I was trying to balance my schoolwork while writing this book. And then my friends would be like, oh, why didn't you you look like you haven't slept? And I'd be like, oh, well, I was staying up just writing. And they know that I'm crazy about writing. And the second I get an idea in my head, I have to write it down. It doesn't matter what time. And so when I actually published the book, my friends were like, oh, you published a book. You're joking, right? Like on probably Wattpad. So they thought I meant that. When I actually brought like the hardcover of my book, and they're like, oh, you published a book. And my teachers were kind of like, oh, you actually did it, because people think there's a limit to like how much you can do. They think that kids have to actually wait until they're older, because a majority of authors are young adults or over, and it usually takes years to like develop the storyline. But even from a young age, I was already developing it in my head. And so when so when people found out that I actually did it, they're like, oh, that's good. And my teachers, even now, they're still surprised that I wrote it. So and they're always like, they're really supportive. They always ask me, oh, can I help you with this? Like, if you need any help, just come to us. We can proofread for you. And yeah, everyone's being really supportive.
So you are going to continue to write? Is that what your career goals are too, to become a writer, or do you have other goals? And you want to do this as a side thing? Like,
career
is literature your passion?
I have a passion for literature, but I find I'm even more passionate for science. So I see myself in the future becoming a forensic biologist, like working with professional police officers and having them bring in DNA and evidence so I can scan it and find out who a possible suspect may be. I find that more because at a young age I also wanted to become an officer. I wanted to become part of the law force. So then instead I decided to pursue my passion with science. But at the same time, I'm still going to keep writing. So writing is more of a part-time job.
So going forward in terms of writing, what do you anticipate the storylines to be? You want to continue to focus on writing about lifestyle, about identity, about people's struggles, or you looking at science fiction like the scaring people kind of? Is that what your passion continuing to be? I know because there's been 2-3 years since you published this, right? So has things changed, or is it continuing in the same path?
I feel like I'm going to keep writing fiction because I've tried writing non-fiction before and I'm not really getting there. But what I plan on doing in the future is after I'm done writing the Chosen Hybrid series, I'm probably going to move on into a more, like, not a fantasy book, but a fiction book that relates back to the realities, like, more like historical fiction. Something that relates back to the realities of what happened in Sri Lanka. So, like, what happened during the, like, massacres. So I would include that into the storyline. So, say a book I'm planning on writing, it actually takes place around the time of the Veni massacre. So that's how I plan on like keep writing. But aside from that book, I feel like I'm gonna stick to the fiction place.
Yeah, so that fiction is grounded in some sort of a plot that is historical, but doesn't have to be completely true. So let's talk a bit about your next book, because you said you're trying to publish a series of 3,
Yeah.
right? So what's the second one going to be? Have you released that information out, or is it a suspense, or?
Before I was keeping really quiet, but now like I finally finished writing the book, and it's going to be going through the editing process soon. And so the book is called A Prophecy, Book 2. And it's basically, it starts 5 minutes after the first book ends. So the first book obviously has an open ending for those of people who read it yet. And so I suspect that this book, it's gonna come with a lot more problems. Like if you thought the first book was full of it, wait till you see the second book. And so Kyra, the protagonist, she has to go through a lot more things, and like I find there's gonna be one main thing that's gonna change her in many ways possible that relates back to women having to make like a choice, having to take on leadership, and like they have to become more independent. So yeah, Kyra's becoming like she's made a lot of change over like the first book, but second book is gonna mainly focus on that change. So like how she goes from being more of a reckless teenager into a more mature woman.
So the focus on women and choices and so on, is it grounded in some sort of a feminist theory, or is it grounded in some ways like women's rights, and are you tackling that in terms of the society and how women are treated and so on? Is it more realistically coming from your observations?
More realistically, because I find like nowadays people view women as the more lesser sex. So it's like the book is to show women that, well, you don't like it's time to stand up. I mean, you gotta take control when you have to take control. It's not you wait for your other self, like you wait for your other mate to go and do it. You have to actually stand up for yourself, and you have to do what you have to do. And it's about just improving yourself on the inside. So as you grow older on like your physical appearance, you also grow more mature on your outer appearance.
So that it does seem like you're tackling some sort of a rights-based approach as well. So there is a message, there's some sort of an empowerment message that comes out of it, directly or indirectly through the book. The publication itself, the fact that it's being shared and so on, people have read it. What's been the feedback generally around your publication and people's reception to it? How has the community been supported?
First thing, when I go up to people, I'm like, oh, would you like to read my book? And then they're like, oh, of course. And so like they buy it, and then they turn it over and they see my picture, and they're like, you wrote that book. And then that's kind of their initial thing, because they think, oh, a younger person wrote the book. They don't really know what to expect, because people my age wouldn't be writing novels. Like we wouldn't be writing young adult novels like as of now. But so after people read it, it's more like amazement and like surprise, because they're like, oh, she can write a novel. And so like I find people are more amazed, and they're kind of supportive, because they're like, oh, you're following your dreams.
How important is branding as an author, as a novelist, or as a writer? You on social media, are you promoting your brand as a writer early enough, or are you waiting for a period to pass to do that?
So like basically I've started advertising even before like the book became published. I was telling people I'm publishing a book, like would you like to come to the book launch? And so the book release is to gather more people's attention. And so basically from last book launch, it was a really good success. We got a lot of books out there. A lot of kids were reading it. Like everyone got drawn into it. And then when more people found out that from the people that came to the book launch, they kind of spreaded the word. And when people found out, oh, a 13-year-old wrote a book, they came to me and they're like, oh, like how will you talk to us? Like tell us about this. Like we'll buy your book. And then from there it kind of spread. Like the word spread, and my family was like supporting me. My uncle, he's a pastor. He told his church about me. My dad, whenever he goes to like the houses he works at, he always tells his customers, "Oh, here's my daughter's book. Would you like to buy it?" And almost all of them do. So that's how we've been advertising, really.
That's great. So, I just read your bio as well before, the show, and you have a breadth of interest
Yeah.
in martial arts, is it? Or
Yeah. International Shotokan karate.
Okay, and then you have, interest in dance.
Yeah.
So can you take us through like some of the areas that you're exploring as well, and how does that make you a better writer?
Karate. More like I started taking karate when I was younger because I wanted to learn self-defense, because I think I saw some kind of ninja movie and I was like, I want to do that. So I walked in and I realized it was more than just like being able to throw punches and like flying kicks. It was like discipline. So that's kind of like I've been more disciplined through karate, and I find that's how I've matured more. So karate is the reason I'm more mature and able to write more mature subject matter. Dancing is kind of my way of like releasing all that stress from like it's kind of my escape, and I just love moving around. I'm not used to sitting, like even now I'm gesturing with my hands because I'm really I like moving around. I'm really energetic, and then I'm also a drummer, so that kind of explains why I use my hands a lot. And so I just like being busy. I can't stay home and I can't just lie down on the couch. I can't do that because then I feel internally sick. Not externally, but more internally, and I can't do anything. So I like staying busy.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Actually, and indeed, you're in great time. You kind of, nobody from the interview would guess that you were in great time. Nobody would guess from the publication that you were 13 when you're. So thank you very much for sharing your insights, sharing your talent with the community, with all of us. Just quick question in terms of future. How does the community? I know it's all based on your product and how you market, but how would you like the community to support your future initiatives or future book releases and so on?
Really, like if anyone just tells me, "Oh, great job," you're like, just keep pursuing your dreams, and that's fine with me. And also, like I've been helping people like with advertising, like they always spread the word, like, "Oh, she's pursuing her dreams." And even now, like I feel for the future, I'm gonna keep spreading the word, like pursue your dreams when you're younger. Don't wait. And so that's why, like, I'm also going to different book exhibits over the summer next year for my second book, where it's going to be in this book exhibit in, I believe, Germany, China, several places in the U.S., Mexico, and I forgot the last one, but London, yes. And so we're going to be going, me and my family, we're going to be going there, and then we're going to be advertising our book that way, and we're going to be spreading the word of a young author.
Nice.
And so that's kind of my message. I want people to know, like, don't wait for your dreams to come true. You got to put them in motion.
Yeah, I know. Time is precious, and, when you can do it early, it's probably better. You can get starting to roll on your career and on your goals early enough, right? Instead of waiting around. So thank you very much. It's a great message, and also we also want to encourage more young people to read. In this new age, there's a lot more video games and a lot more TV stuff than reading, which kind of restricts people's imagination. If you don't read, a whole lot of things get missed. So thank you again, Sharuthie Ramesh, for coming to the studio and sharing with us your talent, your insight. For viewers, her book, A Choice, Book 1, A Prophecy, is the next one coming up. Get a copy and support our young, talented writer in our community. Thank you very much for watching Crossroads. Please send your comments to feedback@tamilvision.tv, and we will see you next week with another topic.